We start today by talking about the Astros offseason. And Bob Nightingale tweeted out earlier today that Jim Crane spoke with both manager Dusty Baker and GM James Click and plans to formally extend each of them a contract for next season. Doesn't say if it's going to be a multi-year contract for Click. Doesn't say for Dusty if it's just a one-year deal. You would think at 73 years old, Dusty Baker can call a shot if he wants a one-year deal. That's fine. But what do you make of that news? Because that's where we start. Mark Berman then caught up with Dusty Baker and says it's going to get done. They're working on it. But Nightingale saying that both Baker and Click will be receiving contract offers. That's where we start, Cody.
I'd like to know the specifics of these contract offers, because if it is indeed a year-to-year thing, that might make a ton of sense for Dusty Baker. Makes a ton of sense for the Astros to act with Dusty Baker that way, considering he's 73 years old and he's one of the oldest coaches, managers, heads of the coaching staff in all of sports around the world. So it would make sense to go year-to-year to him. Year-to-year contract should not interest James Click whatsoever.
No.
A year-to-year contract from James Click should end with James Click saying thanks, but no thanks, taking a year off and being the top general manager on everybody's board next offseason.
It's a slap in the face to James Click, isn't it?
It would be totally ridiculous for this organization to offer James Click anything less than a substantial offer in a negotiation. And if it is indeed a year-to-year offer so that Jim Crane can sit there and crow and say, well, I made an offer to him. Yeah, but you didn't make a real offer to him, which we've seen this organization do the fake offer to people before in various ways. Obviously, the Carlos Correa contract negotiation, the most recent one. But I would think after looking around and seeing what they accomplished, they would put together something that could make everybody happy. Because having everybody on the same page, having everybody thinking the same way is not a good way to do business. It's not a good way to have your organization, whatever line of work, whatever line of business you're in, that's not a good way to go about things. You need dissenting voices. And we've seen over the course of the season, we've heard over the course of the season, we saw some news come out yesterday about more of the dissenting voices in the room. Like, it's good to have healthy discussion about your business, about your organization. I don't want a general manager who does exactly what the manager wants. I don't want a manager who does exactly what the general manager wants. I want them to work towards the absolute best apex of the team. And I feel like having dissenting opinions, having guys that don't feel the same way is the best way to do that. That's why the Dusty Baker and James Click marriage seems to work so well. It's old school and new school, and they got to work together, and then Jim Crane intervenes when Jim Crane needs to intervene. I like that setup. Don't ruin this. Don't mess this up. It'd be very weird to see one of these two guys leave after everything this organization has accomplished.
Yeah, hopefully cooler heads can prevail, and both of these guys are back in their posts next season. I mean, they just won the freaking World Series. There's no better way to end a year, and there's no better testament to show the job that these guys did than with the championship. So I think most Astros fans would like to have both of these guys back because of what they were able to accomplish, but I almost feel like the ship has already sailed. I almost feel like it's too far gone at this point. And Cody, you're right. Dissenting opinions are good. Healthy discussion is good. Because that brings up questions, and that leads to a lot of successful things being done. But there's a line. You can't have one guy going behind the other guy's back to do stuff. There's a line. And it gets to a point where I could see one of these two not feeling super comfortable working with the other one of these two. And I think James Click is already gone. I just said it. A one-year deal feels like a slap in the face to him. Now, Dusty's old. He's 73. It makes more sense for him. Maybe he only wants a one-year deal. But for James Click, I mean, come on, man. I think his mind is already made up. I think this is Jim Crane trying to get the court of public opinion on his side, right? Like trying to tell Astros fans through Bob Nightingale that he made an offer to keep James Click here because he knows people like James Click. But my guess is the Astros already know who their next GM is. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope James Click is back next year. But my guess is the Astros already know who their next guy is going to be, and it won't be James Click.
That's why the way the tweet is worded is interesting to me, because it doesn't imply if it's a 1 year, 2 year, 3. Like a GM like James Click coming out the World Series should be looking at a 5-year contract. That's where you start. A 5-year contract for a guy that just won you your second championship in franchise history. The fact that it's worded like that would imply it is only just a 1-year deal. And if that's the case, I'm with you, BK. James Click says no. And he becomes a free agent. Maybe he sits out a year, joins another team, and he'll get a chance to be a baseball GM somewhere else. A lot of teams will want to hire the guy. Maybe not right away, but a lot of teams will want to hire the guy.
James Click could find himself some pretty easy work for some good money for a year, too.
Yeah, ESPN's baseball analyst here on the Wheelhouse.
Yeah,
we'll take him.
He could be on the Wheelhouse. He could be on MLB Network. He could be a bunch of different places if he wants to talk about the ins and outs of being a general manager and then set himself up to be one of the hottest commodities next offseason. And look, we see it in the National Football League sometimes. We see it in the NBA sometimes. Just because decisions have been made right now doesn't mean that those decisions stay the same. Heck, we saw it a couple of years ago or a year ago or so where, all of a sudden some awful dirt shows up on a general manager in Major League Baseball, and then some team all of a sudden has a big opening. Well, a team having all of a sudden opening is how James Click got his first shot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not out of the question that if he wanted to sit out, he'd have a shot at something that maybe comes up this year out of the blue or something that could be a prime spot a year from now. But if I'm James Click, I'd have a very hard time, unless it was an extremely lucrative deal, I'd have a very hard time thinking about that one-year situation and not feel like I'm being totally disrespected by the offer of a one-year contract.
Yeah, it's a weird situation, right? Like, on one hand, you would think James Click would love to come back to Houston because he's in a perfect situation, right? The Astros just won the World Series. We talked about it a ton yesterday. It feels like this team is one of, if not the favorite, to win it all next year. And this golden era of Astros baseball doesn't appear like it's going to be ending anytime soon. So from that perspective, hey, everybody likes winning. It's not just the players who like winning. Coaches, front office people, obviously fans, like everybody loves winning. So from that stance, it's fun. But you go back to some of the things we heard during the year and really around the trade deadline. Some of the reports about, Dusty wanting this guy and Jim Crane wanting this guy and James Click wanting somebody completely different. It almost felt like at times throughout the course of the season, James Click was undermined by the guys around him. And he's got to be thinking, man, I could get any job in the world because I just won a World Series. Like, I could take a year off, like you said, and then go basically anywhere that I want because people would love me because I now have this on my resume. So it's the discussion of, hey, winning is fun, but also, do I feel like I'm allowed to do my job to the best of my abilities? It's got to be frustrating when you know you're good at something, you know you're capable of doing something, and you're not allowed to do the duties of your job. Because it sure as hell feels like at times this year, James Click wasn't allowed to be the general manager of the Houston Astros like his title says.
Yeah, Jeff Passan wrote about it on ESPN. There was a heavy lean in by Jim Crane on the process. They brought in Jeff Bagwell on the process, according to Passan. And James Click had a deal done for Wilson Contreras, the catcher from the Cubs. And Dusty Baker went to Jim Crane and said, we got to nix this deal. And Jim Crane nixed the deal, wouldn't give the approval to make that trade for Wilson Contreras. Now, Dusty's reasoning was guy heading into free agency that I don't know well or I don't have a good feel for, and he's going to want to play every day. Pretty tough for me to have that guy on the roster and be benching him and not playing him all the time. And then they traded for a catcher who was headed into free agency.
Yeah.
And they didn't play all the time. So don't know that I totally exactly believe Dusty's reasoning for why Wilson Contreras wasn't eventually here. But I'd also be worried if I was James Click on signing a multi-year deal with Dusty Baker on this year-to-year situation, because it seems very clear that you're not going to be able to hire the manager that you want to hire. Dusty Baker, you sign up with him. Yeah, it's worked. And I just told you, I like that type of setup where two guys are sort of dissenting and can learn to work together. But if I'm James Click, I'd certainly want some sort of assurance that when Dusty Baker calls it a career, I get to call the shot on who the manager is. And if I'm James Click and they do give me that assurance, why wouldn't they eventually take it away from me? Like, yeah, okay, you can call the shot, you can pick the manager, and then 3 years later, Dusty Baker's retiring, and then Jim Crane's like, actually, no, you're not going to pick the manager. We're going to hire this guy.
If it's a one-year contract extension offer, he's not taking it, he's gone. And then you wonder, what are they doing next? Do they have the guy they want to bring back? Could they call Jeff Lunau and get him away from running a Mexican soccer league team to come back to Major League Baseball? I mean, if Alex Cora could get another job, if all these guys like A.J. Hinch could get another job, why can't Jeff Lunau, if that's the plan?
Tough part about Lunau being involved in the process, he's the only guy that's never said, I'm sorry. Cora said, I'm sorry. A.J. Hinch said, I'm sorry. Lunau's never said, I'm sorry. And Lunau says he doesn't have to say, I'm sorry. He's been very outspoken about that, and I feel like that's one of the issues with not having Jeff Lunau back in baseball is he's never said, I'm sorry.
I wouldn't hate it.
I wouldn't hate it.
Oh, my God, that guy's the best GM in Houston sports history. I talked about it yesterday. I think he deserves a ring for this year's title. Like, most of the pieces on this Astros club were brought in by Jeff Luhnow. That's the reason this golden era is happening. It's because of that guy. So I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't think too many Astros fans would hate it if Luhnow was the guy because we know how good this team has been because of him.
The interview he gave to Sports Illustrated a few weeks ago made it seem like he was very much at peace with not being in baseball, even hinted that he was close to being done with baseball, even with the amount of success that he had because he wanted a new challenge or to try something new. That's really easy to spin zone after you get fired because you didn't stop a cheating scandal.
You can't fire me because I quit.
Yeah, so it's really easy to put the spin zone there if you're Luhnow. Here's another aspect of this. You'd have a laundry list of guys lined up. You'd have your pick of the litter lined up trying to hire somebody to be the general manager. So it's not like James Click walks away and, oh, my God, he's the only person that would want to be the general manager of the Astros. No. There'd be hundreds of guys in front offices across baseball that would love to be the general manager of the Houston Astros. So if you don't get James Click, you made him a fugazi offer that you knew he was going to decline, and you want to go find somebody else, there's plenty of options to go find. And it's arguably an even better situation than the one that James Click took over in 2020. So you may have even more suitors than even in 2020 when you had those guys.
A huge thank you to you for watching my video. This is Jake Asman here. If you're a Houston sports fan, subscribe to my channel and then listen to our radio show, The Wheelhouse, every single weekday on ESPN Houston from 3 to 7 p.m. It's on ESPN 97.5 FM and 92.5 FM. Thanks for being a listener.